I'm seeking advice on my situation. Should I make a police report or wait for something to happen first? So far, I have put in a Ring doorbell, 6 security cameras, and reported to my HOA president so I could get my contact information removed from the directory. The HOA president told me the man's wife seems afraid of her husband, so telling her what happened seems like the wrong thing to do. Should I be concerned? 6 months ago, new neighbors moved in, a husband and a wife. Within the first week, I started to feel uncomfortable. The man would go outside and smoke many times a day with his chair facing my yard. I caught him many times staring. He never looked away when caught. He talked to me often over the chain link fence. After weeks of being stared at, I started planting bushes between us. I bought another bush to sit on my deck so I could sit behind it and have a little privacy. Didn't work. I was sitting on my deck and glance up. He is full on staring at me and does not look away when caught. I go in the house. I took the next day off early and put up a 6-foot-tall, solid privacy fence. I was so happy to avoid as much of the staring as possible. After the fence, he started trying to talk to me in the front yard. Now that winter is here, I'm hardly ever outside. About a week ago, my doorbell rang and I was expecting someone, so I opened the door. It was that neighbor. I stepped outside. Here is what happened. Him. Why don't you come over and have a beer and watch football? Me. No, I'm getting ready to go to my friend's house and can't drink and drive. Him. Repeats. Come over and have a beer and watch football? Me again. No, I'm getting ready to go to my friend's house and can't drink and drive. Him. Leans in and says, I think you're hot. Me. Stunned, says, aren't you married? Him, my wife is married. Him again, I think you are hot. Him, let me come in and we'll watch football. Me, no, I'm just going inside to hang out with my dogs. I went in the house. I vowed to myself to never open the door again and ordered a doorbell camera. The following day, he came back to the house, but I refused to open the door. Should I be afraid? Is this stalking behavior? They've only been here 6 months, and I've wanted to move many times since they moved in. When my neighbor moved, he knocked on my door and handed me 2 bottles of camp stove gas and said, hey, you could have these. They were the same 2 that I had stowed in my closet with my camping gear, which I didn't know I was missing up to this point. He must have broken into my house at some point and taken them, and then did me the favor of returning them because he was moving and didn't need them. I had a neighbor who moved in with the woman who was already living there. They weren't perfect neighbors before, but they weren't the worst. But after he moved in, there was just constant shouting and music playing loudly until late in the night. That wasn't the creepy thing. The creepy thing was that the woman's daughter accused him of touching her, and her mom kicked her out. I was talking to him in the back garden, and he was making his excuses and trying to convince me he wasn't a nonce. But he certainly seemed to be protesting too much because he offered up some information that I didn't have that made him look worse, but he thought it would somehow not do that. He basically told me he isn't allowed to see his toddler son from his previous relationship because his ex lied and said he was molesting him, but he was actually charged for it. So there was enough evidence to put him away, and we all know how hard it is to get the courts to take molestation seriously. Basically admitted to being a full-on nonce to argue that he's not a nonce. Ah, yes, a place where I might be able to talk about how my husband was almost kidnapped by the assumed pedophile who lived next door. His neighbor always kind of creeped him out. Random kids were always coming out of his house. He never saw them go in, just come out. One day, while he was 6, he saw some kids playing in his neighbor's driveway, so he took his bike over there and played with them. Neighbor runs out there and starts yelling at them. He directs the other kids to go home immediately. Then he looks at my husband and says, "Hey," husband's name, "does your mom know you're here? Why don't you come inside for a little bit?" Husband told him that he heard his mom calling and ran back home. Years later, The neighbor moved out of state, and my husband's dad bought his property and the house to expand their lot. Inside this dude house was very weird. There was a door to every single area. Door to get in the kitchen, door to get to the living room, a random door that split the hallway in half, obviously bedrooms and bathrooms, and random trap doors and secret compartments in the floor and under the house. And every single door had a lock, even the closet doors. I had such a creepy neighbor, I couldn't sleep sometimes. A couple years before he moved away, he would start the chainsaw in the middle of the night, and he would saw wood for like 5 minutes, and then he would start the lawnmower, even if he mowed the lawn, and he would start walking around, waking up everyone in the neighborhood. Well, it was all like that until a couple years ago. He started the chainsaw, as usual, but then instead of taking the lawnmower, he took a 15-meter ladder and got on the back of his house, put the ladder and climbed on the roof of the house. But then the unexpected happened. I thought he was going to commit suicide, but he started staring at all houses, including mine. After he finished, he took a note and wrote down something, got down from the roof, and just ran in the house like if something was chasing him. In the morning, I saw him packing all his stuff in multiple cars, but he took one more look at all houses, wrote on the note again, got in the car, and drove off. A lot of my neighbors think he had mental problems because some of them saw him taking pills, while some other neighbors think he was on drugs. In my early 20s, I lived with a friend in a crappy apartment building of broke college students. Only 3 of the building's 8 units were filled, until the creepy neighbors moved in. They were 2 men in their 40s and worked construction. Out of the ordinary, but hey, the rent was cheap. They started setting up a tiny grill in front of the back stairs every single night. Since we parked there, we had to walk very close to them through their tiny encampment every single night. They would invite us to eat or inside to get stoned, but we just gave polite hellos. Then our panties started going missing from the shared laundry downstairs. It wasn't uncommon for other tenants to throw your dry laundry in your basket, but the new neighbors left notes on top, asking us to call them or come over. Now, a gal may not notice a pair or 2 missing, but over time, our lacy favorites and casuals alike had vanished. My roommate worked at a restaurant that had its name and address on the back. It's a fairly popular dive in our area, so she didn't find it odd when creepy neighbor 1 showed up there, but after he stayed until close, she started feeling a little creeped out. She was right to feel that way. When she left work, he was waiting next to her car for her. She gave him a stern talking to, drove home. When she got home, creepy neighbor 2 was waiting in the bushes. Luckily, she had called me to give her a lookout from the balcony and saw him pop out behind her, so we caught him in whatever nefarious act he was planning. We moved out shortly after. TLDR, creepy panty thief neighbors stalked my roommate. Not recent, but when I was a kid, my grandma had an old guy that lived next to her. She thought he had dementia or something leading to that, so he wasn't like overly creepy, but just did strange things. One time, he offered my sister and I a nickel each if we kept up his yard. Another time, asked my grandma if she could start getting out of her car from the passenger side because she was disturbing his sleeping rocks. His side yard had gravel, which was right next to her driveway. And another time, my grandma offered him lemons from her lemon tree, and the next day, the whole thing was chopped down. Nothing really creepy about my neighbor, just that he collects loads of random stuff and stacks it in a garage at the back of his property to never look at it ever again. Besides that, he is really into technology and installed a lot of cameras on his property. Some of them also face my house, which I find kind of creepy. I always feel self-conscious walking in the house as I have a feeling I'm being watched, although I am not sure he actually does. My dog once visited his lawn, however, and he instantly sent us a video of his camera recording saying that our dog was there. Kind of hypocritical, as some friends of his always let their dog loose and they take a poo on our lawn like a couple times a week. Oh, and last thing, He owns drones and those toy airplanes with cameras on them and flies over the properties of the people on my street to, I guess, film their gardens or something. Once, his drone got disconnected and ended up in the garden 2 houses away from his home, and he had to get it back. Kind of awkward, and when word came around, the whole street is kind of cautious about him as everyone knows the guy films a lot. Weird man, I don't like him. I lived briefly in the shithole that is Hemet, CA. My neighbor at the time was practically a shut-in, maybe 35-year-old male. It was not clear for a while what his deal was. I suspected he might have been a tweaker or mentally ill because he always had the shades drawn on every window and never went outside. Then one day I came out my back door into the yard, and in his yard next to mine, he has dragged his mattress out into the dead grass and has lit it on fire. What he didn't expect is that, being that mattresses are dense as fuck and he only had a little bottle of lighter fluid, his little plan petered out around when the mattress was only half incinerated. He then proceeded to bury the remains with a thin layer of soil. But he didn't dig a pit, he just covered it with soil. Ever after, there was a 10-inch tall platform in the shape of a mattress in the middle of his backyard. Some friends and I rented a house from a guy whose very elderly mother lived next door. She'd come over at all times of the night asking for help with things, some real and some imagined. When we would help, she would pay us with rotten tomatoes from her garden, or sometimes a couple dollars in cash. The creepiest incident was probably 3 a.m. and I hear someone moaning at my window and tapping the glass. It sort of freaked me out when I turned on my light to see her glowing face staring in. She was wanting help to silence the birds that were keeping her awake. In this area, there were several kites that would roost in the trees nearby and make their obnoxiously loud chirp all freaking night long. She handed us some rather large firecrackers and told us she wanted us to blow the birds up. We tossed about a dozen of them into the woods, and the birds all flew away for the night. She was happy and never mentioned this again. I wouldn't say he was creepy, but just a nuisance to the street. He moved in with his adoptive mother to supposedly try to get his life on track. The guy was 30. He immediately brings his boat that is literally full of trash and parks it in front of my neighbor's house. Now begins the random visitors. 2 a.m., people showing up at his place, sometimes going through a window instead of the door, most likely selling drugs. He converts the shed in the backyard into his room. That becomes a drug den that smells like a public bathroom that's never been cleaned and needles everywhere. He goes through multiple girlfriends that have little children, which always ends in an explosive argument after a couple months. His drug buddies steal his car from the driveway. He proceeds to go to their house and fights them to get it back. He manages to somehow set a fire in the garage, and the whole house has to get smoke remediation. His adoptive mom buys him a camper trailer just to try to get him to park it somewhere else and leave. He parks it in her driveway and stays there another month. In the time he was here, about 1.5 years, I think he got arrested 5 to 6 times. His poor mom put up with so much shit. She was the nicest lady I've ever met. Eventually, they sold the house, forcing him to move on. He ended up taking his trailer to his grandpa's house to continue the cycle. Now our street is peaceful again. My wife and I move into a nice suburban neighborhood. Very safe, a quiet street with a kids' park, no traffic, houses all look the same, kids playing everywhere, and very multicultural. Basically, the ideal Canadian suburban community. People from all over the world, their kids, and everyone lives here to have nice, quiet, and safe family environment. Day 1, the guy 2 doors down walks over, a bit rough around the edges, fairly nice, and gives me his interpretation of the neighborhood. One guy down the street will break into your garage. Lots of colored folks, the usually racist undertones. The guy had a cane and camo pajama pants and t-shirt on all the time. One day, a neighbor, who is super nice, is celebrating her daughter's wedding. I think the daughter is a doctor or lawyer. So they are out celebrating in traditional dress and drums. It was fantastic. The old dude wasn't super keen and made some strange racist comments in passing. You get the vibe. The other strange deal was his wife would never be seen outside, like peek out from the curtains to watch the kids playing. Likely a domestic abuse case by the look of things. Anyways, one night I'm in the front room watching TV. I get this weird vibe, so I look out the window. The entire street is filled with the SWAT team, all dressed in black with tactical rifles. They are hiding behind my truck and walking through everyone's yard. This is Canada, and unlike the US, we're not really big on guns and militarized police forces. This is the only time in a decade I have seen the cops on our street. Suddenly, the guy walks out under gunpoint. He's a cripple, so he has trouble lying down on the road. They cuff him and put him in the car and drive away. Then the wife comes out, dressing gown and all, and sits in another car. 30 minutes or so pass, and the cops are still hanging around. Suddenly, they start bringing out a ton of tactical assault rifles. They fill up half a pickup truck bed full of these things. What made it even more creepy was a few weeks later, the guy was back and asked the family in between our houses if they would sign off as a reference for him to get his guns back. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. He moved away soon after. Not really creepy, more crazy. When I was younger, I had a neighbor who had 2 young children. They were a little younger than me and my brother. We had no problems with them until one day when me and my younger brother, about 7-year-old, were playing with her daughter, maybe 5-6-year-old. My brother was learning about family history in school and learning about different ethnicity. The daughter and mother were both darker skinned, and he was just a curious kid. Asked her what her ethnicity was. Little girl was confused, but the mom, she heard the question. She blew up. She had been watching us like a hawk and stopped smoking her cig and yelled, "Daughter, get over here. You kids, get your mother." So our mom came out, both standing on their porches, and this crazy lady just starts cussing and swearing, calling us racist MFers and everything else in the book. I will never forget the horrified look on the little girl's face. On another occasion, she called the cops on us. Why? Because we were playing on the sidewalk and trespassing. She didn't understand that it was city property. Policeman shows up and is very rude to my mother. After going and talking to the crazy neighbor, cop apologizes for his behavior and for us having to live next to her. She would even stand on the sidewalk and prevent us from crossing it. She also turned all the neighbor kids and their parents against us, even having one of my former friends videotape me and my brother as we were playing on the other side of our property. Like, WTF? When we put up a privacy fence, she was watching us and got the mayor involved when she thought we were building on her property. We weren't. Even sending her 4-year-old son over and having him annoy my parents and family. "You're in our yard, you're in our yard, you're in our yard." My grandpa was great. He just turned to the kid and was like, "Maybe part of my ass is." Shut that kid right up. She was also in a kind of yard war with my mom. She likes to garden. My mom would put up a garden, neighbor would have to have 2 gardens. We got a pool, they had to get a bigger pool. She spent all this money on trying to make her yard look better, but all the while, she wasn't paying her bills and even had her water shut off. Noted, this I learned from the mayor. Parents were good friends with him. They couldn't even use the huge pool they got. It was never full and full of green algae. Side note, she thought we were racist until the day she saw my aunt's boyfriend playing with us in the pool. He was a huge black man, darker than most black people I see on a regular basis, and a very thick accent. Really nice guy. She was floored, but still insists we were racist. Lisa, if you are out there, you are a bitch, and I worry about those poor children you raised. I had a creepy neighbor in my development, a mother and a daughter. They were just odd, and everyone hated them. They would act like the victim in the beginning, saying everyone was picking on them. Then, when you felt bad, they took advantage and started bugging you on a constant basis. It would start whenever you came home, they'd run up to you and talk to, like they were waiting for you. Then, after a while, everyone who talked to them thought it was too much. After a while, you'd just run away to avoid them because they were too clingy. Then one day, when my mom was home, she was trying to avoid them, running from her car as they called her name. My mom went in the house and forgot to lock the door and pretended she was gonna sleep in case they rang the doorbell. Then they opened the front door and walked inside, calling her name. I would have flipped out, but my mom kept her cool and just said she was busy. They also, as a side note, peek out their windows whenever you walk by, always hear gossip and talk shit, even though no one likes them, and the mother and daughter are socially awkward and say and do the weirdest things. The daughter's in her late 20s and acts like she's 5. I'm real late to this, but I have a creepy neighbor. Almost every tree in his yard and woods around his yard have no trespassing signs nailed to them. He blasts talk show radio stations out of his garage. Not music, just talk shows. He has a makeshift fence of logs and big-ass sticks that goes around his house. In his yard, he has many huge statues of African animals, giraffes, hippos, and lions, stuff like that. One time, my other neighbors ran over his dog and killed it accidentally when it ran out of his yard. Those neighbors who hit the dog said that after that happened, the creepy guy would come up to their windows at night and look inside. I talked to this weird guy one time, and he had a really strong European-sounding accent. IDK what it was, though. I think he's harmless, but he gives me bad vibes. Also, one time I was walking past his house and saw him holding a garden hose and just blasting this one section of his yard and making it into a mud puddle or something. IDK what the F he was doing. I lived in a lower upper duplex house. I was downstairs, creepy neighbor was upstairs. However, it had been a single-family home at some point before renovation, so I had a back door off my dining room that led into another part of the house, which consisted of a shared hallway, stairs to the shared basement, and the neighbor's staircase up to their place. Mind you, I also had a front door that was street-facing. There was also a street-facing door off the shared back hallway that was the neighbor's entrance. One day after creepy neighbor's release from jail, domestic abuse of living girlfriend, he told me his son would be coming by more. Okay, no biggie. Didn't even know he had a son, but okay. Creepy neighbor then asks if I could let his son into the shared hallway in the back if he's ever not home to let him in. Okay, why not? I guess he can sit on the stairs and wait for dad. No. Creepy neighbor specifically told me he wanted his son to be let in my own back door off of my part of the house into my apartment itself. I told him I wasn't really comfortable having his 17-year-old son hanging around my apartment as a woman in my mid-20s. Told him I didn't have a problem just letting him in that back hallway to wait for his dad, but that was it. I wasn't letting some random sketchy-looking kid in my apartment. Creepy neighbor was quite insistent his son be let into my apartment, and I continued to say no. Eventually, he dropped it. But maybe a week later, I heard creepy neighbor talking on the phone to someone through his open window while I was outside. He was referencing me and the meds I have to take for ADHD, controlled substances. I believe he and his son were going to rob me of my medications. I'm sure they heard me at some point ordering my refill over the phone with the doctor and put 2 and 2 together. I started blocking both doors into my apartment with heavy wooden chairs jammed under the knobs at night after that. So I have these 2 neighbors. Let's call them J and M. They've lived next to each other for quite a while, like upwards of a decade, you know? Well, M decided he wanted to build himself and his wife a house on their property, but they needed a place to stay while it was built, so Jay offered to let them stay at his house. About a couple weeks later, they noticed their septic was all backed up and the toilets weren't flushing properly. They call in someone to drain it and find out it's filled with paper towels. Jay and his wife approach M and his wife and come to find out M's wife was flushing paper towels down the toilet instead of toilet paper. So, a little irked, they told her that if she needed to use paper towels to clean up, that she needs to throw them in the trash and not flush them. A few weeks later, the same exact thing happens, and they have to pump their septic again. Now, mind you, that's just what started J and M's little spat with each other. After that, M started annoying the hell out of J, like leaving trash, literal bags of trash. And because we live in the woods, of course, the wildlife got into them and scattered the contents everywhere. In his driveway, on the road, on J's right-of-way. Jay asked M to move it, but he never did. After a while, M started getting an attitude towards Jay whenever they were around each other. Things came to a head that New Year's Day when Jay was doing some road work with his tractor and he left a pile of dirt in the middle of the road. Now, their access to their homes are on the same road, and Jay had gone back home to take a break and was planning on coming back in a little bit to smooth out the pile with his tractor. But before he could, some of M's family members who had come to visit decided to leave around mid-morning but couldn't get their car over the dirt. M went into a rage, accusing Jay of putting the dirt there just so his family couldn't get out, which he didn't. Him doing the road is pretty common because it washes out easily. After a bit of arguing, M snaps and goes back to his house and comes back with his tractor. He promptly shouts, "I'm going to kill you, motherfucker," and pins Jay against his metal gate with the bucket. Jay was so badly injured that he couldn't even make a statement to the sheriff before he was rushed to the hospital and stayed in there for 2 weeks. Apparently, they were prosecuting M for assault with a deadly weapon, maybe attempted murder, not sure, but recently Jay's wife passed away from unrelated causes, so he hasn't been talking about what happened with M with anyone. That, and the only reason why we knew about it in the first place, is that my mom got one of M's packages and went to take it by his house, where he answered in his underwear and asked my mom to be his character witness. The lawyers wanted her to testify for a bit, but pretty much left her alone after she said she never really interacted with M. They just happened to live near each other, and he was rarely there anyway because it was a vacation property. Before all this, M was known around as a peeping Tom, and once walked up into my aunt's yard, who was living on the property directly next to us at the time, and started looking in her windows. Mom confronted him about it, and he said he was looking for his dog that got loose. She didn't call him a liar, but told him the next time to call, otherwise he'd be liable to get shot. My aunt at the time was a stay-at-home mother with a daughter that hadn't started school yet, and her husband wasn't at home during the day because of his working hours. A few years ago, an older male, maybe in his 50s or older, moved into my apartment complex. At first, he seemed normal, kept to himself. Then, as weeks went on, he started to get really weird. Always on his porch in tiny underwear, trying to talk to people, including kids. He once tried to convince some kids to help him clean his home. Then there was an incident where he was grilling in his boxers on the playground, accidentally started a fire, and got chased by the police. I had been ignoring him for the most part until one day I made a stupid mistake and replied to his "Hi, how are you today?" with a simple "Hi, good, how are you?" On my way back from my mailbox, I was so distracted with thumbing through my mail that I replied without even thinking. Big mistake. Every time I would take out the trash, check the mailbox, or sit in the swings, he would come out and either watch me or try and spark up a conversation. Once he yelled out, "I like your new hair color, you look beautiful." I ignored him. Sometime later, I'm having a few friends over, and there's a knock at the door. I tell one of my friends to see who it was. She looks out the peephole, doesn't see anyone, so opens the door. She goes, "Who the fuck is that?" I walk over, and it's the guy running back to his apartment in his boxers. He had left a bag of tomatoes on my welcome mat. A bag of tomatoes. My SO and I threw a party in the summer, and this guy we thought was our friend started an argument off our balcony with some angry-ass guy over his shit parking job. We didn't hear any of it as we were inside. As the guy was leaving the party, he apologized in advance to me if some angry guy came looking for him. The next morning, we saw a beer bottle had been broken off our door frame, damaging it. When we and some friends who'd slept over went to grab breakfast, there was a guy with a fucking wrench waiting for us. At this point, we hadn't connected any of this with the parking spot argument. He asked us which one of us was the one with the big mouth. We didn't say much, and he said, "Oh, you're not such big talkers now, are you?" He eventually walked away after some more taunting by way of kicking a door to the staircase open. My SL called non-emergency police because I was fucking terrified, and they came and talked to the guy along with our neighbors. The guy said our friend, who we no longer talk to at all because of this, threatened to smash his head open. So I guess this argument was longer than presumed, and neighbors corroborated his story. The cop told my SO to be more careful who he invites over, and that he would have done the same thing in the guy's position. You would have smashed a beer bottle off our door frame and came after us the next morning with a wrench? What a great cop, huh? In the fall, we were stuck in the elevator with him and a woman he was with. I'd been hoping he didn't recognize us, but he said, "I wish I'd had a samurai sword," to try and freak us out, I guess. The woman didn't get what he was talking about and called him a fucking weirdo. I think he's moved out because I haven't seen him in a few months, and his car is never in that parking spot anymore. Another one is. But damn, that was hell for a little. Definitely gave me anxiety about being home without my SO. One guy in my neighborhood used to follow me while I walked my dog. I was 12. He would just step off his porch and stay about 20 feet behind me until I went home. My dog would be going crazy, barking at him the whole time, and I'd pretend not to notice because the one time I talked to him, he ended up calling me racial slurs, which were not accurate to my identity. I'm white, and he used slurs usually aimed at Latinos. I stopped walking down his street, but sometimes he'd see me and turn and follow me. After it happened once or twice, I told my mom, who bought me pepper spray and wouldn't let me walk alone unless she or another adult was at home and had an approximate time of when I'd be back. If I didn't check in during that window, she'd call me, and if I didn't pick up, she told me she'd call the police. One time, he followed me home and was walking a lot closer than usual. I panicked and sprinted the rest of the way down my block, and my brother and his friends, half our high school's wrestling team, bolted out onto the street, and the guy turned tail. I didn't have many problems with him after that. Years later, I was talking to another neighbor of mine who actually lived next door to him. She told me that there were actually 2 adult men, twins, living in that house, and that they were both mentally disabled. Their mom would come over most nights to make them dinner. She and her family had actually had to call the police on them several times because they would harass her when she was coming up their driveway alone. However, because they never got physical, all the police could do was warn them to stay on their side of the property. I still live in this neighborhood, and I occasionally see one or both of them on the streets, but they haven't bothered me in years. Probably because pedals don't mess with adult women. There are times when I almost wish they would try something. Now that I'm grown and know how to defend myself, I wish I could teach them a lesson for how scared they made me feel. I should have let my dog bite them when I had the chance. I had this new creepy divorced woman move into the downstairs apartment after the other tenants moved out. I rented the upstairs 2-bedroom with the attic. She rented the downstairs with the basement. The 2 apartments made up the entire house. When she moved in with her 25-year-old son who didn't have a job and smoked pot and did other drugs, she began to harass me. Her harassment was fueled by her obsession with me. She started copying everything I did, like the woman in the movie Single White Female. She also called her son Babe. I could hear through the walls. Anyway, her obsession escalated to extreme jealousy, and she wanted me out by putting pressure on the landlord to evict me, even though I had been a tenant for 5 years. Finally, she made a false police report that I made terroristic death threats to her and her son. The state police were pounding on my door for an hour and calling me on my phone telling me to come out with my hands up. I never responded to the drama, Broadway musical, so they finally left. She made a complete mockery of the state police. It played like a script from the Twilight Zone, and the only humor I could find from all of it was on that day I had to write a research paper for a contemporary literature class I was taking. My paper was based on the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and as I was watching the movie, I rented it because I didn't have time to read the whole novel by Kesey, simultaneously this shit show was unfolding. She was a lunatic, for sure. So was the landlord. He considered boundaries nebulous, just like him, so I was happy to leave. It's certainly understandable that she's divorced as well. How any man could be married to that is beyond me. Based on what happened in the end of both movies, Single White Female and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it was in my best interest to escape from that insane asylum. I live in a different apartment 90 miles away and have not experienced anything remotely close to that kind of lunacy, and I've been here almost a year now. My landlord happened to be my neighbor a few years back. There was a fence separating the yards, but needless to say, he didn't respect those boundaries. I lived with a couple of guys in the beginning and let them handle business with the landlord because he just creeped me out. But once they moved out, I had to deal with him on my own, and things just went south from there. There were several times I was out tending to my dogs in the yard, and all I would see was the end of his cigarette and a figure standing in the yard, clearly looking over at me, just staring. No communication, just lurking like he was watching me. No, I'm not being dramatic. It creeped me out enough to where once I'd notice, I'd go back inside and just make sure my blinds were shut so he wasn't peering inside in some way. He'd just show up to do a random inspection at night sometimes, checking to make sure there was no damage. Yet I kept the house in tip-top shape and let him know of any issues or changes I wanted to make before I did them. I was and have always been an absolute great tenant. He allowed me to have dogs when they couldn't stay at a place they were previously staying because of other reasons, and I ran it by him before I brought them there, as any respectful tenant would do. He didn't like them barking at him when he would enter the yard. No shit, they're protective and don't know you. Eventually, he wanted me to move out. I got an eviction notice or court order about wanting me out because of my dogs barking at him. Even the judge said, sure, you'll need to leave because he's the landlord, whatever, but he called him out on all the things I pointed out that was inappropriate of him just showing up on the property I was renting from him, regardless of him being the next door neighbor, and just being creepy for other reasons I stated in the courtroom. I won. Side note, he made this dramatic scene after we stepped out, ripping up the court papers in front of me while I was sitting outside waiting on someone to get out of the bathroom. Drama queen. I have an intellectually impaired neighbor who lives a few houses down who was starting to creep me out. For context, I, 34 female, do shifts work at the hospital, and my husband, 34 male, works out of town, is away 50% of the time. I don't know this man well. We've only interacted 3 times. The first 2 times were innocent enough, but now things seem to be escalating. The first time I met him about a month ago, he was talking to my husband on our driveway. I said, "Hi, I'm Jane," and he said, "I know." I thought, that's strange, but he seems to be intellectually impaired. The second time was a couple of days ago. My husband was away. He came to drop off Christmas cards, which he has written, "Dearest Jane," and "Love from Scott, XXO." He didn't write anything like that on my husband's card, just to Bob and from Scott. Then tonight, I pulled up my car in the dark after a long shift at work. Husband is away. We live in a quiet and dark cul-de-sac. Scott appeared out of nowhere in the darkness, standing on my driveway. For context, his house is 50 meters away. He said, "Hi Jane, I've been watching you and I just wanted to let you know I noticed you weren't home, so I kept an eye on your driveway and watched your house for you." I just said, "Okay," and quickly came inside. I feel bad because he is seemingly intellectually disabled, but I am worried he has developed a crush on me and is starting to be inappropriate. I worry about stalking and escalation of this behavior as a woman who lives alone. How to approach and when to call the cops? My neighbors are absolutely toxic, and I like to listen to them argue. I know it's creepy and weird, and I shouldn't, but yeah, I'm that nosy neighbor that knows all your business. It's wrong, but I still do it. My neighbors are fantastic entertainment. There, I said it. Let's call them Jeff and Jen. Jeff and Jen are the trashiest, most trailer park stereotypical, drug-abusing, daily drama morons you could hope to meet in West Bum Lake, Alabama. But here's the kicker. Our neighborhood is in a pretty affluent suburb in a high cost of living area. Jeff and Jen rent an in-law apartment over my neighbor's 3-car garage that abuts my backyard. There's a thin screen of trees between their yard and mine. It's enough that we can't see each other, but I can hear everything they talk about, mostly because they spend roughly 20 hours a day drinking and doing God knows what substances outside, and they don't seem to be capable of conversing for more than 20 minutes without screaming at each other. I used to hate it. I tried calling the cops a few times for disturbing the peace when they were having one of their classic 2 a.m. Saturday blowouts, but I kept getting told there wasn't much they could do about it since no actual domestic violence was involved. Jeff and Jen knew who had called the cops. It was pretty obvious in retrospect. So they sent their dog over to shit in my yard while I was at work. Nice folks. So I just decided to embrace the chaos and grew to enjoy it. It became nightly entertainment. The weekends were always particularly good quality because there were side characters involved. When I hear it starting up, I crack a beer and go out to sit on my back deck to enjoy the show. It's never boring. This past weekend, Jen spent about 3 hours screaming at Jeff about how she was a changed woman. She was turning over a new leaf and wasn't going to take his shit anymore. She wasn't going to believe his lies that he didn't take her stuff because she came home and caught him nodding off. She was a new, strong, independent woman, and she didn't need him. Jeff countered with, "What are you talking about? I didn't take your stuff. I just drank a little. I'm fine. You're brum blum." Jen threatened to leave, which apparently woke Jeff up a little, so he threatened to take the dog and go live with his mom. This went on for about 2 hours before I assumed they found some more stuff because they both suddenly became very mellow and started planning how they wanted to cut down some trees on my property. I'm keeping an eye on that. But anyways, that's it. I'm a nosy neighbor and I like to sit outside and listen to the latest installment of my program. And before anyone says anything, yes, if it ever seems likely to escalate to violence, I will get law enforcement involved again. I'm nosy, not heartless. I've been pretty fortunate when it comes to my neighbors. The one thing that really annoyed me was when all the apartment numbers in the building were updated last year. Everyone had to get in touch with the government to ever so slightly change their address. I was still living at street name X, just like I had before. The only thing that had changed was my apartment number within that building. Well, due to stuff relating to my disability as well as a slight misunderstanding on my part, I thought that it was much harder than it actually was, and therefore decided to wait until I was better to get it sorted. A little while later, I get a Facebook message from someone who says she's my neighbor and demands that I change my address. I don't go into detail why, but I say that there are reasons why it's taking a bit of time and that I'll get it all sorted as soon as I can. Nah, she says, I'll get it sorted right this instant or she'll call the landlord and have me kicked out. So I go to the website where you change your address. I still can't do it since I'm missing the digital ID I need, but I send an email to the people in charge and ask if they can help me. I say this to the woman who's yelling at me. Then I wait for a reply. Can't do much more. A day passes, no reply. More yelling from my neighbor, again threatening to have me thrown out. Another day passes, this time with a reply. It shouldn't be a problem to change my address this way, I'm told, but I needed to supply some additional information. I do that and then inform my neighbor of the progress. She rages on. A few days pass with no reply. I'm constantly berated for the lack of progress, despite explaining that the ball isn't in my court. After a while, I get a response. It's all done. Address officially changed. Wonderful. I let my neighbor know, thinking that this is it and that an apology for her behavior is in order. I get none. Instead, she's asking me why certain non-government websites still say that we have the same apartment number. I say, who the fuck knows? It's officially changed. I don't control how other sites update their information. It ends up with me having to email the person who changed my address and ask her why it's taking so long for these other sites to update their information. She basically gives me the same answer that I gave my neighbor. It's changed and the rest is not up to her. A day or so later, the site my neighbor has been checking finally updates my address so that I'm officially her neighbor and not her roommate, and presumably now everything's all right at least. Nah, I get a message from her demanding that I change my address again. I ask why, since my address is now correct. She says that my address is still the same as hers. I say, nah, I changed it. It's official. It even says so on the site you've been checking this whole time. But she's still mad, saying that we have the same address. It takes a while before I realize she's talking about us both living at street name X, that is, live in the same building. Somehow, she's under the impression that the apartment building is her private villa and that I fucked up by saying that I live there as well. By this point, I'm so close to fucking losing it. While I've aired my frustrations here, during all the stages of this interaction, in reality, I was nothing but polite to her. But being threatened with being kicked out of my apartment because she can't understand how people living in the same house can have the same address, I was so close to breaking. I didn't though, instead explaining that I still lived at the same address, despite the address change. I didn't get an apology, but a final thanks at least ended that goddamn exchange.